The Software Leaders Uncensored podcast, where tech leaders grow beyond the code.
Welcome to Software Leaders Uncensored. I'm your host, Steve Taplin, 25 years serial tech entrepreneur, author, and CEO of Sonatify Technology. Today, we are joined by Marko Vasiljevic, who is the CTO of Ghost. Marko, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Marko, you are an established engineering leader. You've been co-founder, advisor of companies. You're a two-time CTO. Honored to have you. Walk our viewers through the journey of your career. What led you to where you are?
Sure. Yeah. I've spent most of my career in startups. That's kind of like where my passion is. Everything from a very early stage to high growth stage startups. So that's kind of like the sweet spot where I usually spend most of my time.
I'll tell you what, that's what I do, and it keeps life exciting.
It does. It's a roller coaster, but it's definitely a fun one. So yeah, I've done everything from starting my own companies. Some, failing miserably, selling a company, to working for startups like one of the bigger ones that I worked for is Goat. I was on the founding team there and kind of like started from the very beginning and helped that company grow into a multi-billion-dollar company, to last couple of companies that I've been a CTO at, just coming in and really helping the company scale, build out teams, and just kind of get the company and the technology team into a place where it can actually really help the growth and the future of the company. So kind of in summary, mostly startup stage companies and kind of like a different phases of growth. And yeah, just kind of I started. One thing I missed, I started as an engineer. So I was a software engineer for a number of years and worked across, a bunch of different frameworks and stacks and so on and so forth. And then I kind of slowly started moving into kind of managing and running teams.
Fantastic. Appreciate it. Now, for those unfamiliar, and your company is called Ghost, that could be interpreted a bunch of different ways. Describe what Ghost does and the problem it solves for the retail industry.
Yeah. It's named Ghost because we are trying to keep it relatively secret in the sense that we're really working. We're a B2B inventory marketplace, and we work with buyers and sellers of different types of inventory. And in this particular industry, having the right information at the right time, exposed to the right people, is really critical. So we kind of pride ourselves in being able to really manage both sides of the marketplace in I will put it as like a very private and in a very effective way that kind of helps both sides get the most out of the experience and out of the marketplace. So yeah, we work with everybody from very large retailers to small companies that sell on third-party marketplaces, and we work with all kinds of brands from kind of like on the smaller side to like very large international brands. So kind of cover a wide spectrum.
Gotcha. Now, how did you land at Ghost? I know you were VP of engineering and then moved to be the CTO. How did you end up there?
So after my last role, I started looking into the whole world of kind of inventory, specifically around the returns, and started kind of digging into that space. It's a very interesting space in the sense that it's a massive market. So it's if you look at like returns, if you look at kind of general inventory movements, it's probably like $1 trillion+ market. So I was actually looking at a slightly different problem, very connected to this space, but a slightly different problem, and talking to some investors about some ideas, and they actually introduced me to the CEO of Ghost. So we kind of connected through that, started talking, and then one thing led to another, and they brought me in there. So
and interesting.
It's kind of yeah.
So certainly being a CTO is a challenging job. Some might even say an impossible job in the current market of setting expectations between non-technical execs, shareholders, investors, getting the vision to go through, quantifying everything. And, a lot of CTOs are put in a position where they're looking for their next gig. And what I heard you say is you identified an industry problem and started looking at solutions for it, and then networked your way in. I love it.
Yeah. I think it also helps. Network, I think, is the key element there, because the previous two companies where I was at were actually they're both customers of my current company. So there's definitely a lot of connections. I was kind of working more on the consumer side of things in the last couple of companies where I was at. This was at Goat and a network, which is not complex, and we were basically, kind of the consumer facing piece of this. Ghost powers these types of marketplaces and kind of helps with supplying inventory into them. So it turned out that like when we started talking, we actually had a lot of people in common, and kind of there's a lot of connections that sort of existed there. So the network definitely does help.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So tell us about some engineering projects you're working on. What kind of fun stuff are you guys brewing up?
Yeah, it's like everyone else, we are spending a lot of time on the AI side of things and really understanding from a couple of different perspectives, right? So really, really trying to understand how some of these AI tools are actually impacting and changing the way engineers work, data scientists work, data analysts work, product people work, designers work, et cetera, et cetera. Like really anybody who's on the technology teams, how does their work change? So we're spending a lot of time there. It doesn't necessarily projects, but it's more like this, we're going through this sort of evolution / kind of retooling and sort of rethinking of how we do work. So we're spending actually quite a bit of time on that. We just ran a boot camp. We ran a hackathon after that. There's a lot of kind of internal initiatives to like really embed this, this kind of new wave of tooling and really change the way we do work, because I think that's going to be absolutely fundamental for the success of the company as well as every individual at the company, and kind of like ensuring their viability and relevance in this world going forward. So we're spending quite a bit of time on that.
So to dive into that a little bit,
Yeah.
So as CTO, you've implemented tools in the infrastructure in a way that your different team members can freely use those tools securely to be more productive.
Yeah. So we are I think it's early days across the whole industry. I don't think anyone's kind
It's
of got
changing
this
so quick.
Yes.
It's definitely changing quick.
Yeah, very, very quickly. It's like every week there's something new going on. But we have, we're basically we've been early adopters of this. We started as soon as GitHub Copilot came out. We were on it, we're trying it, we're using it, we're like really pushing the limits. But things have changed over the last few months, in particular, as some of these agentic coding tools are becoming really powerful. It's really starting to change the whole kind of approach to the work. So we really double down on that piece, and we're testing out. We kind of have some foundational tooling and processes that we've kind of put in place. But things are changing so quickly that we're constantly evaluating and kind of figuring out what's next. We have moved our team to kind of Cursor being kind of the foundational sort of IDE, and that's been great just to enhance collaboration and sort of pairing on some of these projects and learning from each other and understanding how all of this sort of helps and what works and what doesn't work. Primarily, a lot of the effort goes into what doesn't work and what potentially could work in the future but may not be working right now. So there's a lot of that, and we have a lot of kind of internal conversations and workshops, and people who are kind of looking into this, sharing knowledge and sort of evaluating how we use these tools, and also how that changes the whole process of software development or general product development, not even just software development piece of it, overall kind of product development process. So there's just a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of discovery, we're using these tools very, very actively. We're seeing already some great results in some areas, specifically around QA, for example. We're seeing a lot of really, really positive results. And then in general, I think engineers are seeing productivity gains and just generally being able to move faster and with more confidence. But I think that's just the beginning, right? It's just the beginning. And I think the whole SDLC is going to change quite radically over the next couple of years. And we're trying to figure out how do we kind of reshape and rethink, how we work today. We can't change everything today because not everything is at where it needs to be. But
Right.
How do we kind of position ourselves so that with every new tool that comes out and every new model that comes out, every new capability that comes out, we can sort of fit it into that process and start becoming more and more automated, more and more focused on really pushing execution towards AI, and like really using the team for supervision and management and sort of expertise.
Well, it's good to hear as an engineering leader, you're driving those initiatives. Many times I'll see really smart senior engineers who want to try to use AI to be more productive, but their engineering leadership has not set up their environment to do that. And sometimes they do some stupid things that they shouldn't, or maybe put some code into ChatGPT that shouldn't have been in there with the best intentions of trying to help their team and figure it out. But you definitely got to be careful. You don't want your code showing up on a query that comes 6 months from now on how to solve this type of issue.
Yeah, for sure. And security is a big component of this. I think we're trying to like find this sort of middle line where we're not overly conservative and just not doing anything about it, but at the same time we're not just ignoring all the security concerns, because there are many.
That, definitely.
It's sort of like a bit of a security nightmare. If you take like a security engineer and kind of like show them everything that is going on, they kind of freak out.
True.
Start having rashes, but we're trying to find this like really optimal approach where we do care about security, we do care about making sure that everything we're doing makes sense today and in the future, and also educating the team internally to understand what the risks are and what risks are acceptable versus not.
So tell us about your engineering team. How many engineers do you have? How's your team structured?
Yeah, so currently, we are a growth stage company. We are sitting at around 30 engineers right now, somewhere there. And we're structured into primarily kind of like our sort of main engine is pods or squads, or different people call it different things.
Mm-hmm.
We're very kind of
depends what buzzword becomes common.
Yeah, we're very cross-functionally integrated between engineering, product design, and data. So working very closely. Those are kind of like, that's where the majority of the team sits. We also have a platform team that's kind of taking care of like security, infrastructure, architecture in general. And then we have what we call a mission team, which is really kind of like a release valve for critical business projects that we can kind of jump on and that are relatively small but high impact to essentially protect the roadmap.
Gotcha. Now, are you guys in office? Are you fully remote? Somewhere in between?
Vast majority of the people in EPD in general are remote. So we have some people at the office. We have an office in LA and an office in New York. Some of the people are at the LA office, but majority of the people are remote.
Gotcha. And then do you have engineers US based, nearshore, offshore, all the above?
Everyone is US based except we have one SDET in Costa Rica.
Gotcha. And what kind of drove you have a big engineering team? How do you kind of do the balance of US based versus taking advantage of where you can get some price efficiencies?
Yeah, so my kind of philosophy around that is I do still believe that having kind of the core and the foundational team in the US is still the more optimal kind of setup. I think once you have that kind of core and the very senior core of the team, then it makes sense to start expanding and kind of going beyond. I think that, I've worked with like some really great engineers in like South and Central America primarily. And I've worked with some engineers who are like very much like on the same level as like anybody you can find in the US, but that's not necessarily the norm, at least from my experience. So having that kind of like very experienced engineer who's been like at a bunch of startups and like has the experience is kind of like the core foundational member of the team, and then adding more kind of offshore and nearshore type people usually, from my experience, produces the best results. So we're kind of like at that stage where we're kind of thinking like what is the core and what is the foundation versus where can we start sort of building the team out further.
Gotcha. Now, what metrics or KPIs do you prioritize to assess the success of your team?
So there are kind of layers to that, right? So when we think about kind of like there's cross-functional teams and who are really like working to solve business problems and create business value, that's very much kind of based on aligning with the business goals, understanding what the metrics are there, and then like what are we pushing to like actually make that happen. So that's kind of like, call it more from like the product value perspective, right? So it's like that's like one layer. When you dig a little bit deeper, if you go into specific engineering or data teams or any of the EPD teams, I think there's like a level below that, right? It's kind of like what is your kind of like general sort of productivity and your impact and et cetera on the team. And there, like, it's kind of lower level metrics that we're looking at, like most like DORA metrics, and we do a lot of surveys, and we do we do biannual, so twice a year we do our kind of like general reviews, so we get like a lot of feedback from the team and from the managers and from the peers and so on. So we have like a number of different ways of assessing it. One thing that we also started doing relatively recently is, rather than kind of doing the like assessment every like 6 months, we're actually like doing like check-ins every couple of months, and just kind of checking on the team health and productivity and like any issues and kind of progress and so on, just to be able to like make sure that across the organization we are like very aware of what's going on and kind of where we can jump in and where we can help out and kind of solve issues.
All right. So every CTO's nightmare, is the CFO getting frustrated about budget and coming to you and saying, how do you quantify your 30-person engineering team? How do I know they're being productive? How do you attack that?
I think from that perspective, primarily, I think that's where kind of like aligning with business value and creating, very clear picture of like how that work is impacting the business in a very direct way. I think especially with CFOs, that's, at least from my experience, the most effective way of doing it, right? They don't necessarily care about like, how, what our DORA metrics look like, or like, how fast we're moving. Like they really care about the results. So I think in my view, it's always, outcomes over output. So like trying to really expose and show and socialize the outcomes of the work that's being done and the impact that it has in kind of from various vectors on the business, right? I think that's probably the best way of doing it, at least from what I've seen.
Gotcha. Well, being with a lot of fast growing startups, I'm sure you're used to having to justify your budget to non-technical people. That's always one of the fun challenges.
Yes, yeah, always is. But I think it does help. I like being pushed in that direction and in that way, because it does force you to like really distill. You're kind of thinking about what are we doing here, and like what is the purpose and what is the outcome here that we're trying to create. And I think like it forces everybody to like really assess that from like a very honest point of view. So I actually do appreciate that, even though it's like, it is work and it does take time. I think it overall produces better results, and I think it produces better teams, because I think also like teams and individuals in those teams really like to know what the impact is of what they're doing, right? There's nothing worse than like busting your behind on the project and then just it disappearing into thin air and just like, I don't really know what.
And this show is called Uncensored, so you can actually say busting your ass on this show.
Okay, all right, great.
Talk to us about your current tech stack and why you chose that.
Yeah, so we're very much a TypeScript shop. Like we've kind of made a decision to use TypeScript. We use Next.js on the front end primarily for our front end apps. And then we use Nest.js on the back end, which is just like another Node.js framework. So that does help with people kind of moving around and being able to, jump around between like back end and front end. Obviously, there's a lot that you need to know about both to be effective, but at least we remove one of the potential bottlenecks, which is learning a new language, right? So we kind of are circling around that. We use a lot of Python on the data side, so that's kind of like another language that we use very heavily. In terms of kind of tooling, we're like relatively standard. So AWS Shop, we use kind of like relatively standard tooling from like, Datadog and Segment and, like nothing too crazy or out of the ordinary. And I think the benefit of that is that a lot of people coming in are already familiar with a lot of tools that we use. So we try and kind of just remove that as like being too exotic in that world doesn't really get us much. So we're trying to go with like kind of what are the tools that we need and the tools that a lot of people that we can bring in are going to be familiar with, and kind of stick to those.
Makes sense. And certainly we all have the challenge of making sure we're finding great engineers. But when you're having more of a standard stack and tool set, it allows people to get up to speed much quicker.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And we've seen that, really help. Even onboarding people who may come from a different background, like good engineers, they pick it up pretty quickly. And, that's a huge bonus.
And I mean, I've seen companies that have such complex tech stacks, tooling, that it really takes 90 days to get an engineer up to speed versus others that a good engineer and they're prepped and ready can be very productive within weeks as opposed to months. Have you seen the same?
Yeah, very much so. And I think it's, unless there's a really good reason to get super exotic with some of these things, I don't see it, unless it's like a personal preference that someone has. I usually don't see like a really strong case for doing those things. So yeah, we're trying to keep it simple and just keep our options open.
I like it. So, as a CTO here in 2025, what's the biggest challenge you're facing now?
I think kind of like related to what we started talking about, I think this industry, like many other industries, are going to look very different in a few years. And I think the biggest challenge is figuring out how to transform the team and transform how we do work in a way that is the opposite of disruptive, right? So like that it actually like helps and moves things faster while we're changing. And change is always hard. So like doing those two things in parallel is pretty challenging. You kind of swapping out some pretty fundamental concepts of like how the team operates, and at the same time you're trying to move faster, and at the same time you're trying to retain all the great people, and at the same time you're trying to like figure out how all this works, right? So
It's a lot of juggling.
exactly. So that is a lot. But I think like that's probably from my perspective the biggest challenge, but also the biggest opportunity. And I think starting early and being committed to it is the way to go there and to get there. And I think that it not only benefits, I think there's so many benefits to it. It not only benefits us in the kind of short, medium, long term as a company, but it also benefits us in terms of retention. It benefits us in terms of, just creating a much more of an engaged group of employees who are like learning and being able to understand how their work is going to change and how they stay relevant, right? And I think like those are some really compelling reasons to invest in this stuff, right? Besides just moving faster and being able to do more with less, right? So to me, like that's like the biggest priority, and it probably should be the biggest priority for anybody in technology or any kind of knowledge work, is figuring this out. Because when you look back in like a couple of years, you'll be like, wow, that was quite a journey. Like, and we are in a very different world now. And if you start late, it's, there will be a price to pay.
So, Mark Zuckerberg, probably 5 weeks ago, made a pretty bold claim that within 5 years, he'll be able to get rid of 60% of the engineering team at Meta.
Mm-hmm.
On the flip side, Arvind Krishna, the CEO of IBM, said that AI is actually helping them create more jobs in different ways. What's your take?
So I think it will really depend on the type of company and the stage the company's in, right? Like if you look at companies like, Meta and like these like tech behemoths, they have a lot of inefficiencies built into them already,
Sure.
right? So like I think there is going to be a bit of uh, a bit of an opportunity for them to kind of really tighten things up and just like do a lot more with a lot less. So I think like that's a very different environment than, for example, an environment that like startups like ours are moving in. I think if you on the other side, if you look at like the very early stages, I think what's going on right now is that you're actually able to move a company from like ideation stage into like seed into like A with very few resources, right? Even fewer than like a year and a half ago, a year ago,
Yep.
right? So I think what's going to happen is that like, you're going to see on those two ends probably like quite a bit of compression. Like you won't need as many people to like run things day to day. I think kind of like what's going to happen in the middle is that what's most likely going to happen is that you're going to have the team growing at a slower pace, but the pace of like output and productivity of the team is going to keep growing, like it did, 5 years ago, if you were hiring at the, but you're like now hiring at a much slower pace. So I think it's just going to be like the people are just going to be doing more and being able to do more, and you'll need more people as the company grows, but proportionally you just need less. So I think like that is kind of, at least in this kind of like narrow sort of view of like just software engineers and tech startups, right? Like I think that's what's going to happen. But I think also it's very, so as an example, I think we're also going to see the flip side of that, which is creation of new types of roles, right? So we actually just did this and kind of like kicked this off actually a week ago. We started an automation team internally, right? And an automation team is really focused on using kind of automation, no code, low code tools and AI to create operational efficiencies around the company, speed up a lot of the kind of manual tasks that we're doing, simplify a lot of their processes and so on and so forth. And that role never existed, right? Like you'd never had like an AI automation engineer as a role. Like now we have it, right? And that's a new role that's coming in. Now, is that going to be the same number of people that we would have hired like 5 years ago if we wanted to kind of double our capacity? Probably not. But I think that's like, it's an indication that like there will be new types of roles and new types of jobs that are going to appear that didn't exist before. So I think like in general, probably in the short term, I see probably like compression in terms of like need for engineers, but like also as people realize like, oh, you can actually do more and there's just a lot more happening, you're probably going to see that kind of even out over time, right? And like good engineers are always going to be in demand, right? And they, even though their like skills are going to change, and like what a very good engineer means today versus what it's going to mean in 10 years is probably two very different things. Those like high quality people are always going to be needed. And I think like for them, for those people, it's actually like a massive opportunity to like even like to multiply their own value right now. Because in the future, as a startup, instead of having to have 5 people, you really need 2 or 1, right? You can pay that person twice as much and still save a lot of money, right?
So in this rapidly changing environment with a bunch of unknowns, what advice do you have for engineers to make sure they stay relevant?
I mean, the only, from my perspective, the only sane things to do right now is to really be at the cutting edge of all of this stuff and to understand what's coming, and to like not just read about it and watch videos and kind of like, talk about it, but actually get in there and start learning, because it's very different from what you see from like, demos and POCs and stuff like that versus the reality. The reality is very different, right? And the only way to like really understand what the reality looks like today, but also to be able to project and see what it's going to look like in 3 months, 6 months, couple of years, you really need to be in it all day, every day. So that's like one thing that I would definitely recommend to people. And even if you like work at a large company and they're like, no, we're not allowed to use any of these tools, use it at home, play around with it, start your own projects, like try and use it in some meaningful way. Because if you're not, I think it's going to be pretty much impossible to get a job if you're not like AI native in like the next like 12 to 18 months.
I meet so many software engineers who say, well, at my job, I can't. They won't let us. They don't have it. And my response is the same as yours. At home, on your own computer, side projects, nights and weekends, you need to create your own. You need to be playing with it, or else you're going to find yourself irrelevant.
Yeah. And it's not like it's not accessible, like there's, for like $20 a month, you can get access to these tools and use it, at full speed. So like, I
agree. There's not a high cost barrier to most of these tools out there.
No, absolutely not. And I think that's critical. I think that's like, if you're not doing this as a software engineer now, good luck finding a job in a year. Like that's,
Great.
Because like I've seen, even like it's been really interesting, like we've been rethinking our interview process and sort of how we do this, and I've been kind of doing some research, and there's already like some really interesting examples of companies completely changing their interview process to really focus on like, let me see you using these tools. I want you to go in and do something crazy, like something that like a year ago if I asked you, you'd be like, you're nuts, we can't do this in an hour, right? But like I want you to go in there and do something that like seems impossible and actually get it done with these tools. And I want to see how you're able to like really use this in some meaningful way. And if you can't do that, and if you cannot talk to it, and if you cannot talk about not just like hype and, I'm just going to prototype this really quickly and throw something out there, but like actually think about it, like, how do I use this at scale? How do I use this with other people? How do I use this with my team? How do I use this from different perspectives? You really need to have the depth of knowledge and experience there to be able to talk about this. And the only way is to just get in there and just spend time.
Great advice, Marko. Thank you so much for getting uncensored with us today. Any final shout outs or advice you have for engineers and engineering leaders out there?
Stay curious. I mean, this is like this is an amazing time that we're in. I think this is like probably a once in a lifetime type sort of event that's going on around us, around like the rise of these tools. And this is really an opportunity to like think about what you want to do in the future, and an opportunity to reinvent yourself. So I think this is like it's an inflection point, and it's jump on the wave and ride it and see where it takes you. I think that's what everyone around me is trying to do, and I really appreciate kind of like the learnings and the experience that we're all gaining from it. So I think don't miss it. Don't miss the boat.
Great advice, Marko. And thank you so much for being on the show. That's it for this episode of Software Leaders Uncensored. I'm Steve Taplin. Stay bold and keep building.
Thank you.